Hi, my name is Haley Schulze, and for my capstone research project this semester, I researched the effects of stress on academic performance. While conducting the literature review, I found a couple interesting studies, as this is a topic that a lot of people have looked into in some form or fashion. One study by Maykrantz and Houghton cited the American College Health Association's Spring 2016 Executive Summary, and they found that roughly a third, 33.8% of college students cited stress as something that reported that stress has somehow significantly affected their academic performance. Most of these were in the form of just receiving a lower grade on a project or a test. Some of them was in the form of dropping the class entirely or failing the class. And the study also analyzed undergrad students and found a highly significant positive relationship between student stress and coping abilities, meaning that those students with high coping abilities also reported high levels of stress. But it did not explore further what kinds of coping abilities these students had, as in if they were positive or negative. Another study examined the relationship between perceived stress and academic performance, and they found that stress is a factor that students most attribute with affecting their academic performance, followed by things like sleep difficulties and mental health issues. So this study also found that students who claimed that stress did not affect their academic performance had higher GPAs, even higher than students who claimed to not have stress at all. And with students who claimed their stress had a negative impact on their academic performance, researchers also found them to have higher levels of stress, lower coping self-efficacy, and less social support than students who claimed to not have stress or students who claimed that stress did not affect their academic performance. For the present study, the study I completed, I wanted to look at two different hypotheses. The first was that high stress levels in university students would be negatively associated with stress management. And the second was that a perceived success in stress management, so high amounts of stress management, is positively associated with higher academic performance. For the study, I recruited students at Charleston State University, and I was only able to get about 15 participants. And for the actual study, I put together 3 scales in a survey in the form of a Google survey, or Google survey. All participants completed these 3 scales, and they were the Revised University Student Hassle Scale, or RUSHES, the Stress Management Self-Efficacy Measure, and Perceived Academic Performance Scale. And there was also questions about demographics and GPA. Once the data was collected, I took each of the subscales of the RUSHES scale. There were 11 of them, including things like friendships, gender issues, parental expectations, finance, and religion. And each of these subscales, I was able to find a frequency count, an average frequency, and an average severity for each of the participants. And then each of those, the frequency counts of all subscales was combined into a total frequency count, the same with the average severity and average frequency. And I ran intercorrelations between these frequency counts of all the subscales, and then between the 3 variables themselves also, the total frequency, average frequency, and average severity. So for all these intercorrelations between the subscales, I have a table over here that shows the highest and lowest for frequency count, highest and lowest for average severity, and the same for average frequency. For the frequency count, There were only 5 significant correlations with an average R value of 0.132. For average frequency, there were 3 significant correlations with an average R of 0.201. And then for severity, there were 6 significant correlations, and the average R value was 0.251. So the highest for these 3, the highest for frequency count was between gender issues and physical appearance, and this was negative, I apologize, that's the lowest. It was negative 0.276. For the highest between frequency count was friendships and religion, and it was 0.739, which is still only a moderate correlation. For average frequency, it was between gender issues and parental expectations at an R value of 0.69. And then for average severity, it was between traffic and parental expectations with a value of 0.668. And then once I found all of those numbers, I also found the correlations between the total counts. So for between frequency count and average frequency, it was 0.69. Between frequency count and average severity, it was 0.394. And then between average frequency and average severity, it was a high correlation at 0.82. And then I also, so to test for the first hypotheses, I used the stress measures, the frequency count, average frequency, and average severity, as that was considered the independent variable for that one. And then stress management was the dependent. So I ran correlations between those, and none of them were very significant. In fact, the frequency count, the correlation between frequency count and stress management was negatively associated, but only a negative 0.374, and I had predicted it to be positive. And between average frequency and stress management, it was almost 0. It was a negative 0.015, so they're almost not correlated at all. Between average severity and stress management, it was 0.294, so still not significant. And then I also ran correlations between the stress management and the academic performance measures. So between stress management and perceived academic performance, it was a negative 0.309. And between stress management and GPA, it was 0.370. And between perceived academic performance and GPA, it was a 0.369. So in all, the only significant correlations were found between the subscales of the stress levels. And the first hypothesis was not supported very well, as the only measured correlations between stress and stress management were weak correlations. They were between that 0 and that 0.5, both negative and positive. And then the second hypothesis was not supported at all, as the predicted correlation was a positive one between stress management and perceived academic performance, and the actual association detected was a weak negative correlation. One of the biggest limitations of this study was the small sample size, and a larger sample size could possibly produce significantly different results. I would like to look into a few of these a little further. Specifically, why some of the subscales were so highly associated versus some of the other ones that were negatively associated. But a larger sample size would definitely be something that is necessary to get actual numbers or results that would be applicable to anything or other people. And then I've also included all of my references. 3 of them are the scales that I use, and then 2 are studies that I referenced in the introduction.